With me are Tao Chow from the California Energy Commission and Jen Amen from American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. I am trying to get my screen up here for you all. We'll do an introduction in a second. Excuse me, one moment. Did not expect the delay in the screen, so, okay. All right, so it's a little challenging. We can't see anybody out there, but we welcome you all. It's great to be here with you. We are talking this morning about the challenges and opportunities of energy codes, which are relatively new in the cannabis industry. And so we'll provide an overview of government actions on energy issues and then which are broad and taking a few different forms and shapes out there in various states and countries to some degree. And then we'll talk specifically about energy codes and their intent and the implications of them. We'll look at other sectors and how energy codes come into other sectors, why they do, and put some context into what the cannabis industry is experiencing as it relates to energy codes. And then we'll zero in on California's proposed Part 6 codes that are currently under contemplation. And there will be a workshop this month that Tao will tell you about. So with that, just briefly, I'll tell you about RII, but before I do that, I will ask Jen and Tao to introduce themselves. Jen first.
Thanks, Derek. So I'm Jennifer Amen. I'm the Buildings Program Director with ACEEE. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We do work looking at programs, policies, technologies, any opportunities for energy efficiency throughout the economy. And in my work with our buildings team, we have decades of experience working on building energy codes and looking at the technologies that drive efficiency in buildings. So I can tell you a little bit more about ACEEE when I get to my presentation and how our work is relevant to what's happening now in the cannabis industry.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And we are honored to have you serve on our board. And Tao.
Thank you, Derek. So my name is Tao Chow. I am an electrical engineer with the Energy Commission in California. I'm in the building standard office. So we do regulate energy buildings across residential and non-residential, which is the commercial spaces. And we do co-update every 3 years to improve energy efficiencies throughout the entire state. And this code cycle, we will be working on one of the measures that include horticulture spaces. So I will tell you more about that later in my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And Tao is from my hometown of Sacramento. The specific subject matter is really advance source efficiency to cultivate a better cannabis future. I apologize if my connection is off. We're essentially creating the benchmarks and baselines for the industry and on energy, water, waste, and carbon. And I'll just share with you that we've been working with our technical advisory council to determine what are the right KPIs for energy use and how do you really assess from cultivation facility to cultivation facility in a standardized way. How do you assess efficiency performance? So we work on assessing data through our Cannabis Power Score tool at the grams per kWh or kBTU per square foot of canopy. Those are examples of the baseline metrics that we're developing for the industry to judge its performance going forward. We also publish best practices guides on a number of issues. There are free resources, downloads on our website, resourceinnovation.org/resources. One about how to cultivate effectively with LED lighting, one about how to operate HVAC efficiently. And we have some future best practices guides on the horizon, for example, automation and controls. We're also developing standards for the industry, and we support governments who are trying to regulate the industry or establish policy that would help promote efficiency. Our view is really to try to support cultivators with the resources that they need so that the efficiency objectives can be met and that everybody wins in that scenario. We do a lot of partnership throughout the industry. Our technical advisory council helps us shape the guidance that we provide to the market and helps us inform the way we advocate for various policies and incentives. The Cannabis Power Score tool is something that we launched at the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium 3 years ago. And it has now been used by more than 300 facilities, absolutely confidential in terms of farm-specific information. This was a tool that was built by cultivators, and it essentially helps cultivation operations in a confidential way assess where they rank on energy performance or water performance relative to the rest of the data set. And as the data set grows, it is the place to help governments and utilities really assess, again, what are these baselines and how do we promote various support services to get cultivators to move toward a more efficient model. Context in terms of why governments are acting on energy issues. And again, Jen will take a little bit more of the explanation in terms of how this industry compares to other industries. But we know this is a very energy intensive industry, or can be. Certain types of production are more energy intensive than others. And it's due to a variety of equipment usages, and it's those equipments, those pieces of equipment that codes are really trying to address, as we'll describe here in a little bit. But we see that there is some disruption into various communities. And we also see through our data that some technologies are proving to save energy. And so governments are eager to specify those technologies and approaches. So various states are reacting in a variety of different ways and from a variety of different agencies or perspectives. So we actually see something unique in the cannabis industry, which is that a cannabis regulatory agency is regulating energy use. We see in Illinois an agricultural agency is regulating energy use. Those are not typical. And then in California, a more traditional code process with stakeholder engagement at the front end of the process, with just a 2+ year process of engaging the market on the way to the release of the codes. So relatively unique approach in California. And again, that's what we'll be focusing on today. Again, RII's viewpoint is it's one thing to specify certain technologies or to require certain approaches, especially in this nascent stage of the market, when we know that every cultivation operation is different and different cultivators have different approaches. So it's one thing to specify technologies. It's a whole other thing to really help cultivators know how to use that technology. And our viewpoint is very much that we need to support cultivators to learn the technologies and techniques. And part of that is creating best practices, and why we focus so much on those efforts and supporting cultivators in that way. In terms of the subject matter, I won't necessarily read this, but and Tao will get into this much more specifically, but we see lighting, HVAC, renewables, and reporting on energy and water usage being examples of subjects that governments are addressing in various regulations. In Massachusetts, we're working with the state there. We provide the Cannabis Power Score tool as a reporting vehicle for cultivators to easily report their energy and water usage to the state through the Power Score. And so we're working with a number of cultivators on a daily basis to help them track their energy usage and get that information up to the state. This gets into the dialogue, and by the way, we really want to have a dialogue, so please feel free to use the chat and engage and let us know how you want to interact throughout this session. But what we're seeing is that as governments take these actions on energy use, what they're essentially doing is creating a new baseline, and in some cases, incentives are going away in the marketplace, and in most cases, the more efficient technology has a higher capital expenditure. And so there's a lot of moving parts in terms of the financial, the finances of these various actions. And there is that need for the education as well. Yet we also know that there's an improved financial picture over the long term, both for the cultivator as well as the jurisdictions that are hoping to get long-term tax revenues. And so what we really believe is the more we can help the producer base be more efficient, the more likely they will be able to return tax revenues to those communities. And so it's in the interest of the jurisdictions to support the cultivators with knowledge on how to be more efficient. What's interesting about cannabis, which is different from other markets, is that we have the illicit market. And in particular, there is a concern about the illicit market in California more than other markets. And we'll dive into that throughout the discussion today. So I hope that provides a little bit of an overview of how and why governments are acting. And now we'll focus specifically in on energy codes and why governments take those actions and how they're taking shape here in cannabis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Great, thanks, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit more about ACEEE to give you guys a little background on why we work in this area and how we work in the area. So our entire goal is to improve energy efficiency. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and in that time, we've worked to advance efficiency policy at the federal, state, and local level. Everything from building codes and appliance standards to utility regulatory policy, the structures that help utilities or offer the incentives and requirements for utilities to pursue energy efficiency as an alternative to generational assets. We find that efficiency is the cleanest source of energy. It's the cheapest, the quickest to get, and also, typically provides many other benefits to users, whether it's, improved durability and performance of the facilities, improved process efficiency, improved comfort for occupants, and on down the line. So what we try to do is really focus on, ways to do the research and analysis to drive policy that makes sense, that's cost effective, and that helps us meet our long-term goals around our energy infrastructure and, of course, protecting against climate change. Our work is funded primarily by foundations, and to a lesser extent, contracts, government grants, and revenue from our conferences and outreach activities. So next slide, enough about us. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, why building energy codes are so important to the efficiency community and to policymakers. They really are a key element of our climate policy and I think becoming increasingly important. Recent analysis by ACEEE shows that energy efficiency can reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2050, and this is with existing technology. In doing that, we would deliver half of the emissions reductions needed to meet our mid-century climate goals. And among the policy options that we analyzed in depth to help get to that 50% reduction, energy codes were very important to that. Of the 11 policies that we recommend, energy codes for commercial buildings and facilities account for at least 6% of the overall savings. So it's a significant picture. I mean, a significant portion. It's a cost-effective policy option. This is why policymakers look to codes. We see a typical $5 billion a year in energy cost savings to building owners and occupants or tenants. Over the 30-year period from 2010 to 2040, DOE estimates that energy codes will result in 841 million metric tons of avoided CO2. That's many millions of vehicles equivalent, and about 250 power plants worth of carbon emissions. We find that it's much less expensive to build in efficiency than to retrofit later. So, one of the things is, if you're in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging. So one way to help us get out of our climate hole is to stop digging by continuing to build inefficient or less than optimally efficient buildings. The cost to retrofit, as many of you with facilities know, it can be daunting. So really trying to use codes and policy to drive those decisions for efficiency from day one. And then codes can really provide a level of quality assurance to owners, operators, and occupants by setting a standard for the performance of a facility in terms of safety, health and safety that are part of codes, but also in terms of energy performance and the performance of the systems that are installed in the building. So next slide, please. So I wanted to go over a few of the basics of code design and talk a little bit about where we've been with codes. So we first saw national model codes developed in the late 70s and early 80s. And so if you look at the graph here, and you don't really need to pay attention to the details, I know it's kind of hard to see, but it's more of a, showing the direction. In the years since 1980, over the 40 years, we've seen continued progress in codes. So, relative to that 1980 baseline, we've seen significant, over 50% reduction in building energy consumption based in the code requirements. And in fact, this chart doesn't even include the latest code. So we're getting even more improvement from the code. So codes in general are targeted toward new construction, as I mentioned, additions, so new portions of an existing building, and major renovations. To date, they've really focused on the primary loads that are required to meet occupant comfort and safety. And that includes the building envelope, how tight is the envelope, the levels of insulation, windows, walls, and so forth, space conditioning, lighting, and water heating. Those have really been the focus of codes for most of their history. But and then we see different compliance pathways that are allowed in the code. So originally it was all prescriptive. It was, you must have insulation of this level, lighting efficiency of this. But over time, we've seen increasing inclusion of performance-based pathways that say you don't have to follow necessarily some of the prescriptive requirements if you can show that you may trade off ultra efficient components here and something slightly less if you come up with the same level of performance. And there's very specific guidance about how to do that. And now we're even seeing an interest and in some cases an alternative path that's allowed through what's called an outcome-based code compliance, where you're really showing that your building not only is designed to meet the code, but it meets the code in actual performance by tracking energy consumption upon occupancy of the building. We're also seeing things like through the performance pathway where compliance with certain labeling schemes or rating schemes can be used for compliance with codes. And then some of the most recent developments in codes include expanding coverage to address plug and process loads. So everything from outlets, requiring controls on outlets for plug loads, and process loads, which is the energy consumed in support of manufacturing, industrial, or commercial processes that aren't related to the comfort and amenities of the building occupants. So it's really moving beyond where we were. Because if you see, we see this great progression in savings over time from codes, but that's only relative to these primary loads in buildings. And as we see, a much more intense push to meet the imperatives of our climate and energy situation, we see the need to expand to cover these additional loads, which are increasingly a large part of building energy consumption, but also are going to be critical to continue advancing and getting more and more energy savings and less carbon emissions from our building stock. So of course, this is what's going to be really important for the cannabis industry, right? We're looking at process loads are the critical part, and that's why we see jurisdictions like California, Massachusetts, and others looking to this industry, expanding the types of buildings that have been covered by codes. Is another direction. And I think these are all things that, these are all givens. This is what's going to happen. We're going to see more and more building and industry types covered by codes, and we're going to see more and more end uses brought into that mix. So next slide, Garrett. So what does this mean for the cannabis industry, for the folks that are here today? I think the big challenge for policymakers and those of us that work on code development, the challenge that we face is getting it right? How do we, take this code, kind of the history we have with codes, and make it work for a very different set of buildings and a very different set of output. It's not about making people comfortable. It's not about some of the more traditional types of uses in buildings. More efficient, other process loads that have been covered in some ways are things like cooking in commercial kitchens, other types of end uses. And I think the opportunity in codes is that because we're going into this kind of new industry has an opportunity to provide input to make sure we get it right and to help drive the process so that these sort of, inevitability of codes doesn't mean detriment to the industry, but is really a way to, for industry to come together with advocates, with policymakers to get it right. And so here are some of where I think there are real challenges and where those opportunities come. So one of the real challenges is in metrics. And I think one of the things that's been particularly challenging is for folks who may have worked in codes for a long time, they see cultivation facilities using the same types of technology that they're used to regulating, or they're used to thinking about the energy use of lighting and HVAC. But we know that, unlike, our traditional codes that have always covered these products and this type of equipment solely based on the services that they provide for creating, safe, comfortable, amenable facilities for humans, we're in a whole different world now where these traditional loads are now process loads. So we need to get the right metrics in terms of, for lighting, that means, shifting from lumens to photons, looking at the square foot of canopy rather than the overall size of the building. In terms of HVAC and dehumidification loads, we're looking at, the impact of transpiration on really changing the loads in buildings, and much more variability in loads between, when the lights are on, when the lights are off, when different amounts of sunlight are coming in greenhouses, really different processes. We see some of the core pieces of the codes that have been developed for buildings, things like requiring economizers. We know that's a huge problem. We know that the impact of the envelope is entirely different for cultivation facilities than it is for traditional buildings. And so, as we begin to work on this, what are some of the options for industry input? And when I say industry input, there will be folks out there, I know some of you in the audience may be already involved in these processes or be interested in being involved. But I think there are other ways to do that, either through, the industry associations that you belong to can represent your industry and the needs of cultivators, organizations like RII that really know the cannabis industry and or want to be a voice for the cannabis industry in these efforts to advance policy. And then, for organizations like ACEEE, we're interested in getting the outcome. So we really want to hear from the stakeholders and the folks that are going to be impacted by regulation to make sure we get it right. So there are opportunities to participate in standards development through ASABE. They've been doing a lot on lighting through the Design Lights Consortium and developing specs for, for high performance LEDs, with new horticultural spec they've come out with. And we already see in the 2021 IECC that was just recently finalized that one of the things that passed was an optional approach for addressing horticultural lighting. So that's moving a little further along. For HVAC and dehumidification, we have a lot farther to go, I think. We're learning a lot, but there are ASHRAE and AHRI processes that can help. And I think anybody on the panel here today could help fill you in if you're interested in engaging in those processes on how to get more involved. Baselines, we don't have a lot of data about the industry, about energy use in these facilities, and you can't make good policy without good data. So I would encourage, all the cultivators out there to, benchmark your facility. You can learn a lot, go to the Power Score, benchmark your facility, see how you compare to others that are out there. That information can help you improve your performance, but it can also provide the data that we need to make good policy. And we see, jurisdictions beginning to require this. This is what they're doing in Massachusetts. And getting that data can help us avoid some of the, the rough patches we've had with the early policy in this area. Some of the, there were real concerns about the lighting requirements in the initial Massachusetts code. And so work has been done to fix that. There are real concerns about the way Illinois has approached the HVAC side of things. So, getting more of this data in place will be really important. Cost effectiveness and compliance alternatives. Those are other, challenges, making sure we get those right, that the codes don't put an undue burden on cultivators as they're, building out new facilities, adding to their facilities, or, pursuing a lighting upgrade or some other upgrade in the facility. What are the best approaches for compliance, and how can we maybe add additional compliance pathways as the industry matures and we have rating methods, or better certification programs for cannabis facilities. On this side, I think the industry input, it's sharing best practices that are working for you and your facility. Take advantage of the best practices that are out there, the great guidance that RII and others are publishing. This can improve your yield. It can improve profitability in your facility, but also make sure that our policies are taking us in a direction where we're coming out with the best results for everyone on all sides. So I think there's a lot of promise. I know it's a time of a lot of uncertainty, but as we work toward these different policy directions, thinking about how we can come up with a policy climate around sustainability in cannabis facilities that takes into account the role of utilities and incentives, the role of data, And then, of course, you know, the need for codes to really lock in good performance and ensure that we can meet our longer term sustainability goals. So I will leave it there, and Tao is going to take it and really provide a much more detailed picture of where things stand in California with their initial proposal, and even more on opportunities for stakeholder engagement in that process.
Thank you, Jen, very much. And here's Jen's contact information. And Tao, before you get started, I just want to let everybody know that we've got a question from Michael Turner, I believe from the state of Colorado. Hello, Michael. And the question is about utilities and governments coordinating together as it relates to probably policy and regulation and, you know, incentives to the market. Jen, you mentioned both those elements. So I want to let Tao have an opportunity to do her presentation, but if we could just think about good examples we're seeing of that multidisciplinary coordination in the market, we could talk about that in a few minutes. Tao.
Thank you. So I figured I start out with by kind of set a framework as why California actually proposed the regulations on horticulture spaces this round of code update, but Jen and Derek's already touched base on that quite a bit about the sudden increase in energy usage because of legalization for cannabis in California. That's starting in 2018 here for us. So as a state agency and as an energy commission, we have the authority, we also have the responsibility to find way to save energy to meet goal. One of the goals we are currently trying to meet is 2030 for zero net energy for all of the commercial buildings. So this is one of the big piece of this big picture that we're looking to address. And the codes that we're regulating will apply to both indoor grow spaces and greenhouses. And this includes all types of crops, not just the cannabis. So that's one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of. We are looking to roll out a code regulation that apply to cut flowers, microgreens, and cannabis is just a part of it. We're not simply targeting the cannabis space. We're just looking to find ways to improve energy efficiency across all of the growing different type of crops in California. So I want to quickly brush up on what California Building Energy Code is about. So officially, we are the Building Energy Efficiency Standards. So the standard is part of the Title 24 under Part 6, and it's usually referred back to the Energy Code. And the Energy Code regulates all buildings, include new construction, additions, and alterations. So all of those buildings fall under our jurisdictions. And the requirements that we have apply to envelope, lighting, mechanical, and water heating, which is very typical, just like Jen brought up. You know, if you're looking at energy saving for the overall building, those are the big four pieces that need to be included in that picture. So that's just kind of very typical way to go about energy codes in general across the board. And currently for the 2019 code that is currently in effect, horticulture lighting is the same. There's a very specific phrase in our code that say lighting for grow lights are exempt, but we will remove that going forward for the 2022 code cycle, and we're going to address how we're going to meet new standard and new requirement on this new lighting measures. Next, please. So I want to kind of show an overall big picture of what California facility crop types would look like when we consider energy saving when we do our analysis. So for indoor type, we have cannabis, which is make up of 92% of the overall stock, and leafy green, microgreen herbs is comprised of 5%, and then we got tomato, flower type, that's only 3% of the on the crops grown indoor. As far as greenhouses, there's more balance here. We have cannabis of a 30%, leafy green, microgreen, that's another 30%, just as like cannabis, and then the rest of the 40%, the majority of it actually the tomato flower type. So those would be how we consider the calculation for energy saving. So I wanna, for this graph, I kind of wanna show people how the indoor cannabis facilities compare to all of the other sectors. This, with many of us have seen this graph before that come from Evan Mills. We could argue about the validity of this paper, but I think this mainly just to provide the overall picture, just to see that the indoor cannabis facilities energy intensive, the KBTU per square foot annually is pretty much exceed all of the other building types added together. So in order to meet goal in 2030, like I mentioned about zero net energy efficiency for us, we are looking at, so this graph here show all of the data what we have collected even before legalization via surveys, other information from drug science and whatnot. We comprise data, and it shows from 2002 trending up to 2018 where legalization occurred. So we are in 2020 now. That's the other data point, and then we're projecting out to 2030. So if we just stay with the current technologies and no policy in place by the time 2030 is here, we would be looking at 9.5 gigawatt hour for this kind of in the cannabis growing facilities, and that's a lot. That's something we really, as an agency, have to address. So we are currently on the way to consider the 2022 code cycle updates, and horticultural lighting measure, greenhouse envelope, and dehumidification are part of what we are considering right now. I know we are in 2020 right now, right? 2020, 2019, 2020, sorry. I can't remember the year. It's COVID-19, you know. So we are working on a standard that's not going to go into effect until January 1st, 2023. So we've got lots of opportunity for stakeholder engagement right now. I'll talk a little bit more about a workshop later, but we have put together the current proposal for the lighting measures. So for all new constructions, for indoor growing facilities, we'll be looking at PPE of 2.1 micromole per joule for all of the lighting, horticultural lighting. And the threshold we decided if you go above 40 kW for a facility, then that's what you have to meet. Previously, I've shown this, and the threshold was different. We used 10,000 square feet, but we did the calculation that converted to 40 kW, which is one of the input we receive from the industry to make the code a little bit easier to comply with, make it a little bit easier for building officials to actually plan check. And then for greenhouse, same thing, above 40 kW for connected lighting, horticultural lighting low. We're asking to have 1.7 micromole per joule for the PPE level of the lighting, and time switch controls and multi-level controls are already required on these two different spaces. And I want to actually stress that currently, even though we are not regulating horticultural lightings, other pieces of those facilities are regulated as we speak, right? So they still already need to meet water, heating, envelope, mechanical system, and general lighting. And this is just specifically applicable to the horticultural lighting system itself. So this is just an additional piece to the existing 2019 code measures. And for addition and alteration, same effective date, but if the space are adding or alter the existing lighting system that causes an increase in lighting wattage and also alternating more than 10% of the existing luminaires, then the new addition alteration would need to be brought up to code. And the existing spaces could be left with whatever technology that's currently being used. Is we're not asking you to go back to improve the existing space. Rather, we're asking to apply the new standard, new code to the new space or the alter spaces, depending on what the project look like. And there's a little exception in there for alteration that are limited to adding lighting controls and replacing lamp, ballast, or drivers. So those, what I discussed are actually applicable to lightings, and I want to kind of briefly talk about horticulture dehumidifications. So we have 4 different type of technologies that are listed right now for the measures. So standalone dehumidifiers with volume less than 8 cubic feet would need to have the minimum integrated energy factor of 1.77 liter per kilowatt hour, whereas a larger unit with 8 cubic feet above for volume would need to meet the minimum integrated energy factor of 2.41 liter per kilowatt W. And there's also, we allow the option for integrated HVAC system with on-site heat recovery, or a chill water system with on-site heat recovery. And of course, the other option is the more typical that I've seen so far are the solid or liquid desiccant dehumidification system that are require at the design 50 degree dew point or less. And the last piece here that I'm going to touch on is the conditioned greenhouse envelopes. Actually, originally, when we first did the code, we did not have this piece in there. We worked on our code. We started working on this code in end of 2018, I want to say, because even though it's a 3-year code cycle, we actually spent about 5 to 6 years working on that. So this was not included originally. And then we first did a couple of stakeholder round, and industry came to us and say, hey, you know, since you're working on horticulture spaces, you might want to consider the current envelope measures that are required in greenhouses, because we didn't really have a specific section for greenhouse envelopes. So that means greenhouses would need the envelopes applicable to a regular building that people would live in. And we had a lot of jurisdictions and designers in the industry come to us and say, you might want to revise that. So current code, we don't want to over insulate and then block our lighting for the greenhouses and then increase the load inside. So then we did a quick look at that, and then we thought it would make sense to actually include the greenhouse envelope measures in there. So we actually allow more on the U factors for the opaque walls and roof. So we increase it to 0.7 for walls and 0.5 for roof. And then if it would be on the non-opaque, would have to meet the rest of the mandatory and the prescriptive requirement, just like other building type. So with that, I want to kind of bring up the upcoming public workshop that we have. So in California, we do rulemaking process in a way that we really encourage public engagement. We want to get comments and feedback from the industry, the stakeholder, or whoever the code might be impacted. So I invite you all to participate in our workshop coming up on the 27th of this month. That is at 9 a.m. Pacific time, California time. And currently we have the docket already open for this public workshop, although the information pertaining to the workshop will not be posted until 2 weeks prior to. So you won't find that yet, but you could subscribe to our listserv, and that information will be sent to you when that's available. So what I've talked about today would be under the control environment horticulture proposal. Again, that hopefully proposal will be posted sometime next week for you to have a look at before the workshop. And we invite all of the comments to be written and submitted as part of the official docket so that we could have all of the necessary document we need as part of our rules making process. Again, we want to make the code to be applicable, make sense, easy to comply, something that help people, not only to help people to save energy, but something that makes sense. So we as the California Energy Commission agency, we really, really pride ourselves in the open, transparent, public engaged process. So this is only our first round of workshop for this measure sometime in February. Once we get this public workshop underway, we put a proposal out, we receive public comment, we will incorporate all of these comments into consideration when we revise the code language, and we'll put it out under the same document here for a 45-day comment period as part of our February workshop for the official rulemaking consideration. So I invite you to please subscribe yourself to our server list, log into the workshop, pay attention to this docket. Thank you. And that's me.
Thank you,
So
Tom.
in case you need to reach out to me for any clarification, and our website is energy.ca.gov.
Thank you, Tal, very much. And I think California provides a really interesting opportunity for the industry to engage because the stakeholder engagement process is so extended. And as you can see, Tal is out trying to get engagement, and California is really important, just like Massachusetts is really important. What these two states do, generally the rest of the states do, and on energy issues, and frankly, they create a blueprint for the rest of the world. So it's actually really, really important for the industry to engage. And I want to jump in and offer some Q&A starters here. And I just want to provide the context that I know we all have, and I see there's a lot of smart policy folks with us today, and at least one cultivator with Cody Hitchcock, and I want to turn to you in a minute, Cody. But you know, wildfires are spreading throughout many cultivation regions, right? They're exacerbated by climate change. Climate change is affecting agricultural stability. It's in our industry's interest to address climate change. I mean, it's literally farmers are running from their properties because of these fires. And so we have a, impact on the production of our industry exacerbated by climate change. And so as an industry, we should be doing something. We should have more of an engaged commitment and position on these issues and the importance to the future of the industry. So I would just argue that California is a great moment in time here to weigh in. So with that, I want to invite comments. I want to jump back to Michael Turner's question. And I guess I'll turn to Tao or Jen first to answer. Do you see any great opportunities or not opportunities, but examples of utilities and governments working together on these issues? The best example I have seen is in Massachusetts, where we received funding from both the state, the Department of Energy Resources, and coordination with the Cannabis Control Commission, and all 8 utilities or efficiency program administrators throughout the state coordinated to bring best practices resources to the cultivation community that were addressing all the issues that were in the regulation. To me, that's a really great example of, like I said, multidisciplinary engagement to support cultivators, but I haven't seen a whole lot of that elsewhere. I think there's an opportunity for that coming up in Illinois. Tao, have you seen anything in California where the utilities are working productively with the state on these issues?
In California, we mainly see utilities working very closely to the local jurisdictions where the enforcement level occur, not on a state level necessarily. But from what I've seen, like I said, the local jurisdiction would support the IOU, the co-ops, and whoever the power, companies that they going with. Losing thought for now for a second for some reason. I apologize, but just mainly it's more on the PUC, the CPUC side. I would say if you really want to look at the state perspective, I would say that the CPUC work more closely with them. They've done a lot of outreach as well, and they also have some discussion in terms of cannabis, specifically how to address and how to work together with the local IOU and the to help cultivators to provide incentive. The incentive come from the CPUC, so that's part of what is currently happening right now. Not so much on our side because we more of a building side, not so much of the financial perspective. Although that might change in the near future.
Great. Thank
So
you.
Derek, I would just add that
Jen,
we
go
do
ahead.
see, I think the type of engagement that you're talking about, that's happened in Massachusetts, and some of the resources that have been provided, the work that's been done there. That's the same kind of educational resources and training opportunities that the utilities in many states provide, for building owners, for contractors, servicing different building types and in other industries. So I think, one of the things that, that it kind of behooves us to do is to, push for those same kind of resources to be put into this industry. As ratepayers, certainly as the states are legalizing, I think we want to look at, how can they develop, a more comprehensive policy strategy that involves, the role of utilities in providing these resources, particularly, offering incentives. This is very similar to what they're doing in other sectors and for other building types. So, and, in other industries, they have programs focusing on, I'll mention it again, commercial kitchens, these other types of industrial programs. And we've seen some, really good programs coming out of places like Oregon with the ETO programs. Yeah. I think the challenge is that just like the cannabis regulations are different in every state, the utility regulations and the utility landscape is different in every state. So you have some states where they may be operating programs on the state level, whether it's through a separate administrator of the programs or through a coordinated activity of the utilities. In others, every utility has their own thing going on. Some states only have a couple of utilities, others have, dozens. So that's kind of a challenge. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think one of the things we should take a look at from the building sector is, the utilities are offering incentives, but once the code changes, the utilities still offer incentives. There's always room for above code performance. So just because a code is adopted doesn't mean that there can't be any more incentives. It may mean that the incentives change, and the requirements to get those incentives may change, but the utilities will be looking to incentivize performance that goes beyond what's required as the baseline. And until those baselines take effect, the utilities can offer incentives. The other thing that I think is really interesting in California, and we're seeing, some other states do this to a lesser extent, but there are opportunities, you know, the utilities may be able to get credit for the savings that come from code. And that's why we see the utilities, you know, supporting efforts like looking at, you know, like developing the code proposals for this industry and working with the CEC, doing research, looking at opportunities, because they do get credit for those savings. So I think there's still a lot of room, and maybe we can have a whole other session about utility opportunities another time. So.
Well, thank you, everyone. We have to wrap before the hour here. I want to thank the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium for hosting us. We hope this was a useful understanding of codes and how they fit into the dialogue. We each will welcome follow-up dialogue if you'd like. There is an important issue of how codes fit into the overall regulatory structure of cannabis, and how they do or do not have an impact on the illicit market. It's an important conversation to have. Didn't have enough time to get into that today, but we welcome further conversation and always want cultivators engaged. So thank you all, and reach out if you'd like to follow on with the discussion. Thank you.